Tyler Glass here with Adorama TV, and today we're discussing the new DJI Air 3. As a longtime user of the Mavic series, going all the way back to the Mavic Pro and using the Mavic Air 2S over the past 2 years, I was super stoked when they announced the release of this drone. I decided to hit up Adorama and see if I could go do a review in one of my favorite places on the planet, Iceland. Iceland is obviously beautiful and one of the funnest places in the world to drone, but it's also one of the most unpredictable places on the planet as well. It has some of the most extreme weather patterns on the planet and can produce hurricane force winds at any moment. That's why I chose it as the best place to test out this drone. As a longtime user of the Mavic lineup, I've always been a fan of the size of these drones as well as the technology and features that they all seem to come with. The Air 2S was a lot of fun to use over the past 2 years, but it had so many downfalls, from its transmission system to its battery life. Plenty of things to think about, and we're going to talk about them today. First, I want to talk about the size and weight of the DJI Air 3. This is the perfect weight for something that I do as a travel content creator. The Mavic Pro series is a fair amount bigger than the Air 3. And to be honest, it's a little big for my camera bag sometimes. I am a pretty minimal guy. I like taking only the gear that I know I'm going to need on a trip. And sometimes the Mavic Pros are just a little too big to fit into my camera bag. I'll actually show you the difference between the Air 2S and the Mavic Air 3. I actually didn't know there would be a size difference in these when I was reading about it when they first came out. But yeah, it's actually a couple inches longer. Not a bad thing. I'm okay with it being a little bigger as long as it's not as big as the Pros. I have it folded out here so you can see another size comparison. Definitely a difference. I was always a huge fan of the size of the Air 2S. I don't necessarily like how big the minis are. I almost think they're too small. I think there's a sense of having a larger, bulkier drone makes it feel more durable, more advanced. But I think they made this one a little bit bigger, mostly because they wanted to have a bigger battery pack in it to extend the battery life significantly. But we'll get to that. Next, we'll talk about the sensor size and the focal lengths. This is a 1 1/3 inch CMOS sensor. It's a little bit bigger than the Air 2S sensor, which has a 1-inch CMOS sensor. The focal lengths come at 24mm and 70mm. Huge fan of the 24mm. I think it's like the perfect sort of length for a drone for most perspectives, but having the 70mm obviously offers new perspectives on, maybe a place that you're very used to shooting over and over again. The colors on the 24mm and the dynamic range is phenomenal. The aperture on the 24mm lens is actually only f1.7, which helps me shooting in more low light conditions. It also helps when I'm using night mode. I was excited about the 70mm, but I was also a little hesitant. I was a bit worried about, having a little bit of a lower quality come through simply because of the crop ratio. But honestly, there is little to almost no quality difference in between these two focal lengths. I was very surprised and happy about this, obviously. The colors on the 70mm are awesome. The dynamic range is just as good. I had a really fun time finding new perspectives with this focal length. I've never used it before. I've never used the 160mm either that they have on the Mavic Pro series. I feel like that would be a little bit too much because sometimes the 70mm actually felt like it was a little bit too much. But there were definitely moments where I was like, having this focal length really added just a lot more depth to my content from this past trip. My goal when I'm going on trips is obviously to find as many perspectives as possible, even on like one certain area. So being able to get a different perspective on almost the exact same frame essentially doubles the amount of content I can get on a single shot. Not to mention the compression the 70mm offers is amazing. You can really tell how much depth it adds to your frame. You can also use the 70mm to create a 48 megapixel panorama image as well. Of course, with a larger sensor size comes with more quality, more sharpness, and more light. This new drone can shoot 48 megapixel stills, whereas the DJI Air 2S could only shoot 20 megapixels. With 20 megapixels, I really had a hard time cropping in on an image. You lose a lot of quality and a lot of information in the metadata once you do that. Whereas anything over 30 megapixels on an image, you're going to get a lot more depth in your image. You're going to get a lot more information. Cropping becomes a lot more possible. I've cropped in on a lot of imagery that I created in Iceland, and they're still super sharp. I felt like with the 20 megapixels on the Air 2S, I was never really able to do like large scale prints. I've tried to do some with them and they look pretty good, but especially if I crop it all, the image really loses a lot of its quality. With the 48 megapixel stills, I don't really think there's any limit to the size of a print I can actually do, which is really awesome in terms of a drone. As for video, you can do 4K HDR. A lot of creators who don't really like editing on log footage will pull footage in Rec 709 straight from the drone itself, do a little bit of editing, and then post. A lot of people want to be able to pull and post very quickly. Being able to use HDR to do that will actually give you more dynamic range while filming in Rec 709. So for a lot of you creators who don't prefer filming in log and then going through all the editing and color grading process in post, having HDR footage is a great way to be able to just strictly pull the imagery straight from the camera and try to post it as soon as you can. For those of you like me who do love filming in log and editing in post in log, the D-Log-M is awesome. It's a lot different from the D-Log as it adds a little more color contrast, I think. So when it comes straight from log into post, you're kind of working with a little bit more color already. It's almost like adding a bit of a gamma assist to it. This also helps when you're shooting so you can kind of see your exposure level a little bit better. But you're not losing any dynamic range. You're not losing any of the natural colors that come with it. And editing the videos from this last trip have been like really, really fun. The colors are super natural and clean when they come out. I don't really have any hard time going from my Canon log footage to the DJI log footage. They're actually pretty similar, so that's nice. And of course, filming in log will give you the most dynamic range possible when going and trying to edit in post. So let's talk about the battery. The new advertised flight time on the DJI Air 3 is actually 46 minutes. It comes pretty close to that. We were flying in a lot of different conditions in Iceland. At one point, my drone was flying essentially almost sideways. The wind was probably coming in at 40, 45 miles an hour, maybe a little bit less than that. But the gimbal stayed perfectly centered somehow. There's a lot of footage that I took while flying like that around Vesterhorn. You'll kind of see it in a video here in a second. The Air 2S had around 31 minutes. That was the advertised time. I'd say it probably more came in around 25 to 26 minutes, depending on what conditions I was ever flying in. Those batteries seem to go very, very fast compared to this one. The drone batteries charge extremely fast using this new charging hub that they come with. It's charged via USB Type-C, which is known for obviously becoming like a staple on the market for fast charging. You can charge 3 at a time, but one of my favorite things about the hub is that I actually use it to transport my batteries. I'll simply stick it in my camera cube and the batteries just kind of go in nice and neat, and you don't have to worry about them flying around, you know, mid-flight or bumping into each other and essentially like, I don't know, breaking. The charging hub usually takes about 50 minutes to charge a single battery, whereas the Air 2S I'm pretty sure used to take around 80 minutes to charge a single battery, and that was for almost half the flight time. So you're really getting a lot out of this new charging hub, one of my favorite pieces of this new drone. Let's talk about one of the biggest complaints about the predecessor, the Air 2S, and it was the transmission system. It was infamous for losing transmission in some of the easiest, most simple conditions and simple shoots. You'd literally, having something in between you, like a car, would completely cut the transmission system. You couldn't sit in your car while flying or anything, even if it's super cold out. It was just a mess. DJI promised the new 04 transmission system with this drone, and I was a little bit skeptical considering how bad its predecessor was, and I was completely wrong. This 04 transmission system blew my mind. I think throughout a 7-day period, I may have lost transmission once, possibly twice, and that was because I had the drone on the other side of a mountain, like when it made sense to possibly lose transmission. But if I was simply just sitting in my car trying to keep warm while shooting, never had any problems. I had full confidence that my drone was fine. With the other transmission system, I mean, you would just lose complete imagery of your drone, and you would have no idea where it is. That really did not happen with this drone. You'd see a little bit of glitching if, like I said, it was on the other side of a mountain, but other than that, transmission system was seamless. Now, one of the big reasons for that transmission system is going to be the new remote. This is the new RC In2 remote. This is the first drone to be released with this exact remote. You can choose to get the other remote if you want to, but I definitely prefer this. The Air 2S had the remote where essentially you just had the controller and then you'd have to attach your phone to it. And it was actually kind of like a real nightmare scenario because then you had to make sure that your phone was charged. There were plenty of times when I was trying to send my drone up in the last couple years and my phone was on like 10%. Essentially, I'm like, well, I have like maybe 5 minutes to get this shot. The battery life on this remote is awesome. You never really have to worry about that too much. I think I charged it once over halfway through the trip and it still had half the battery left. I was just trying to play it safe, of course. Not only that, but the remote actually has a memory card slot in it, so you can record backup footage straight to the remote. More peace of mind. That's what we love with our drones, is just, just feeling a little bit safer about the drone itself, but also the footage that we've been paid to try and capture. All this being said, no drone is perfect. First off, I was shocked when I found out there wasn't going to be any variable aperture on this. I don't think it was as big of a deal for photo. When it comes to depth and creating a wider depth of field, when you're far enough away from your subject, I really don't think it matters, having a more narrow aperture. I think that once you're far away enough, you're far away, and shooting at f2.8 is just fine. Where it kind of affected me more was video, when I'm wanting to shoot at 30 frames per second to get some motion blur, and I can't up my shutter speed because I'm not getting that same movement or the blur itself. I'd have to stick NDs on it, and when you're shooting during golden hour or sunset or sunrise, the light is changing every 5 to 10 minutes, and you're not really you don't have time to bring your drone down and put a new ND filter on it every 5 to 10 minutes. You just don't have time to do it. So you really are kind of having to up your shutter speed a little bit. I was upping it to 120 in the hopes that I would still get some motion blur, but not nearly what I was hoping for. It's not a huge deal, but I think that, having the variable aperture means being able to just throw it at f.4, f.63 real quick, and being able to keep your shutter speed as low as possible. Another small little, it's more of a peeve, are the fact that the props, even when I'm like trying to store it and stuff, can kind of just go all over the place like this. It doesn't take much. So when I'm trying to put it in my bag and the props are kind of sliding out like this, the props can break, or I'm just wasting time trying to stick it in there quickly because I'm shooting, DJI Mavic Pro Series and the newest Mavic Mini all have that prop guard that kind of is just like a rubber guard that you just wrap around it and it keeps your propellers from moving. And I kind of just thought it was kind of silly that they didn't add that to this drone, especially since it came out between the Mavic Pro and the Mini. I don't know. It seems like something that costs very little. Like if they were to put it on the market right now, I would buy it simply because this just annoys me to no end. I can't stand it. I just think it was a really easy fix that they could have done. All of that being said, I am a massive fan of this drone. Every single upgrade they did with the Air 2S was greatly needed, and they did it right, I think. From the larger sensor to the almost double battery life, this thing really almost has it all. If you are a mid-level to professional level creator and you're wanting something that's not super big, this is definitely the drone for you. I highly recommend it. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I want to thank Adorama TV for sponsoring it and sending the drone. I was so stoked about some of the footage that we got in Iceland that I actually created a short cinematic film to put at the end of this video. So if you're on the fence about getting this drone and you just need a little bit more of a push, here is some of the footage that we took while in Iceland. This is all captured in D-Log M and color graded in DaVinci Resolve Studio. And yeah. Here it is.